No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jet is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Hey guys, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Rumble as well. Today my guest is a return guest, May Times. I actually have a weekly show with him, if you guys watch that. Every week at Tuesday at 9:30, already dead. That my guest today is Austin Picard. We're finally starting our Watergate series. It's been a long time in the making. We had a couple scheduling issues where one of us have something important come up in life, the other one the next time. So it happens. You have these scheduling issues. So we're finally getting around to it. Who knows? Maybe something will happen in the middle of this stream and screw it all up. But here we are. Third time's a charm. But yeah, I do want to remind people how this works. If you're a patron, you get this content early, roughly about a week or so. And if you want to get that, that's patreon.com. So that's No Way Jose 2020. The lowest level is $2 to be able to get those early access, or if you just want to support or whatever. And the highest level is my sponsors. I read them off every episode. My first sponsor is my co-host on Tower Gang, at Tower Gang Toad, and I also have at Abrogate D's and Kevin B. Clark, a full-time guitarist and private music teacher in the New York area, then at ZOVERACK, then at _Infinite Zeal, then Jacob Daniel of the Biblical Anarchy podcast, at Biblical Anarchy, then Tim Tuttle, at Jolly on Klebold, and then also I have my buddy Will Bell. I think he's Will Bell or not Will Bell or something on Twitter, but he's got Rabbit Eye Wine. This stuff's dope. I drank all this in like record time, way too quick. A little ashamed of that, but it's delicious stuff. Highly recommend it. But yeah, I just big shout out to you guys. Help me do what I do. Don't make a ton of money doing this, but you guys keeping on. But with that, let's go ahead and get Austin in here and get to it. What's up, my man? How you doing?
What's up, buddy?
What it do?
Watergate.
Yeah, dude.
Finally.
Yeah, it's funny. And we just had Nick Bryan on the show the other day. And he just had the Watergate. I don't know when that book came out, but I know it's his most recent one. He had a Watergate book. And apparently,
it wasn't too long ago.
You guys have similar conclusions, although you haven't read it yet. So
Yeah.
I thought I was under the impression you were. I told Nick you had, so he has a higher rating than you do.
How dare you, man? No, that's the only one I haven't, honestly, but I will, and I'm hoping to by the end of this series. That way I can hopefully kind of, compare notes in a way, but I'm sure that he probably covered a lot of details that maybe haven't been covered in the past as much. And what I did hear him say is that he was kind of taking the approach of he mentioned all these tomes basically that had been written about Watergate, which, man, there's over 100 books written about Watergate, right? But I think he was specifically referencing like 4 crucial works that I value most definitely, which is one, Secret Agenda by Jim Hogan, Silent Coup by Lynn Kolodny, White House Call Girl by Phil Stanford, and Postgate by John O'Connor, who actually was like the legal representative for Mark Felt in like the 80s, I believe, who a lot of people considered to be Deep Throat, the anonymous, source for Bernstein and Woodward at the time. But Yeah, I don't really think that's the case after looking into it a little further. But anyway, so I
Yeah.
kind of think the best way to start is first to kind of briefly lay out the political landscape of the
I
time.
would like to quickly just, even if it's just my dumbass doing
Yeah,
it, just a quick overview of what the fuck Watergate even, like, even just the most simplest. Because I think, I mean, I would presume my audience is probably roughly in the same age range, plus or minus maybe 5, 10 years as us.
right.
And this is definitely for our generation. I think me and you are
True.
within like a couple years in age of each other. I forget who's
You're
older, younger,
32,
whatever.
right?
Yeah, I'll be 33 next month, so I think we're about the
Okay,
same
yeah,
age.
I'm
So yeah.
32 as well.
Yeah, so we're about the same. So, like, yeah, I would assume your recollection of like actual real world knowledge as opposed to
I
just
didn't know
like
shit about
parapolitics.
this
Yeah,
before
didn't
I
know
came
shit.
into it.
You're
Yeah.
just like
Hmm.
Watergate. You thought it was some sort of spying on political, like
Yeah.
the kind of that vague concept. You don't even
Hmm.
know the specifics at all.
Right.
You know, like you're just kind of like something about the president spying on his opposition and got busted doing
Right.
it. And that's kind of I think the vague recollection that most people have. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that more that kind of like I guess what roughly
Hmm.
vaguely the official narrative has become because I feel
Hmm.
like as it is always with these sorts of events there are like layers even in what the official narrative is. Like the what I just labeled really probably isn't even fair to call it the official narrative. That's the like public consciousness's official narrative, and then you
Right.
have like maybe you could have like the cursory
Cursory.
cursory understanding official narrative. You know what I mean? Like and
Right.
like this happens a lot with like JFK. Like you know, like people will be like at one level they'll be like, oh, this was clearly a lone gunman, and then it's like, oh, well, he had help. Maybe it was the Russians, and then
Right.
there's like layers, and the next thing you know, you're thinking about the black nobility or something. But
Yeah. Oh God.
I don't know, but you get the point. There are layers, and,
Definitely.
and, and, and sometimes maybe people are looking for layers that aren't there,
Right.
but that is just true that there is like this public consciousness one. So I think I just laid out what the public consciousness narrative. What would you even just say? I just kind of would be like the maybe the what would be, and maybe you aren't even you maybe you would admit that you may not have a grip on what the proper answer for this, but what would be like the cursory understanding official narrative, like someone who actually at that time point in time in history probably even took the tiniest bit of time to understand
Right.
it, but without taking an overly critical view of it, like maybe me or you would, and be like, huh, this doesn't add up. Like what was kind of the
Right.
sum parts of the story? What you think? Just kind of like vaguely what the anyone who like read the newspaper is what they would the impression they would get from it.
Definitely. Well, I think what really took the day as far as the official narrative is concerned, and what the public really embraced for the plausible outcome, as far as why they would get behind, so quickly get behind, what basically became a coup, and the overthrow, and at least, I mean, the fallout of after the burglary, which led to the removal of a president. But I mean, the official version is really what Woodward and Bernstein, put forward in the Post, which was they wrote a book which won the Pulitzer Prize about it, called All the President's Men. And then that was later even like adapted into film, and I think like Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford were involved, and I think it even won an Oscar. But yeah, anyway, so it's really basically a limited hangout, and it's designed to kind of manage public opinion, I think, like for the most part, and public perception as well. And their version kind of has us like kind of believing that it's as simple as Nixon and the Republicans breaking into the DNC in order to, basically just get political dirt on the Democrats leading up to the election, in order to kind of like just help his upcoming reelection campaign and bolster Nixon's chances, which made absolutely no sense, especially in regard to how he was polling at the time. Like, he was so far ahead of McGovern, which was the only alternative at that time, really. And so it made no sense on its face as far as like the motive, and
It also I don't think it seemed to make sense because I mean obviously maybe spoiler alert for those. I mean, like, I guess if you have the public consciousness, or even just like really to have no idea, what Nixon resigned. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, my impression, maybe I have a wrong read on it, was kind of like with his favorability and all that too. It's also was kind of bizarre that he just kind of was like, "No, I'm resigning," as
Right.
opposed to like fighting it. Like it probably wouldn't have been a hard fight,
Right.
assuming
Well,
things are on the up and up here.
it was kind of a process because
Mhm.
through after the first arraignment of the original burglars, and well, first let me actually like answer your
Yeah,
question what you initially told me to do.
yeah.
So all of this pretty much began with the arrest of five burglars in business suits wearing rubber gloves at around 2:30 in the morning, early morning hours of June 17th, 1972, who committed this break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters located in the Watergate office building in DC. And so these men were in possession of burglary equipment, camera equipment, wiretapping and electronic surveillance devices, tear gas guns, and sequentially numbered $100 bills. And so the DOJ,
Wait.
they,
Sequentially numbered? Wait, what does it even mean?
I
Does
mean,
that
like in
mean
order,
like
like
their serial ID number,
yes,
or
exactly,
so
yeah.
like
That, as
it
far as
fresh
I'm
off the
concerned,
press?
that's how I interpret that. Yeah.
Okay, that because I was
Hmm.
like, wait, did someone like postmark each one of like one, two, three, that they can keep track of how many hundreds they have? Or are you saying like the serial number is like sequential, like they came off the same
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
batch?
I'm
Okay,
pretty sure it's basically just operational money, right?
yeah.
And yeah, so pretty
You would
much
think
I'm under the
they wouldn't use such fishy money like
you would
that.
think.
Because,
Yeah,
like, I mean, a key part of
unless
the
there
story
was
to
a
jump
secret
ahead is,
agenda, Jose.
yeah, I guess unless you're like trying to get busted, but you're like, or
Oh,
maybe just,
whoa, you're getting
or a
way ahead of
revel. Well, not even get busted, but that's like getting busted for something else more than just.
right.
Although I guess maybe you would want to point to some sort of political shenanigans, so I don't know, maybe that'd be a subtle tell to whatever investigator is like, well, these are numbered, so clearly funny business.
Right.
I guess it wouldn't. My head goes intel, crazy fuckery. I guess you could
Mhm.
see that as left right crazy fuckery too at the
Well,
time. All right.
especially when you consider like who was kind of the operational leadership on the ground, like
Mhm,
because once we get into that you'll begin to understand the dynamic,
mhm,
because I don't think everyone was read in on this secret agenda clearly, but to continue on with kind of the bare bones as much as I can. It seems like very quickly the DOJ and the FBI connected the funds found on those involved to the Committee to Reelect the President and the fundraising organization of Richard Nixon's reelection campaign. And so, unbeknownst to the public, not long after the arrests, Alfred Baldwin III, who was the alleged wiretap monitor, began cooperating with the FBI and telling the Bureau that he had been listening to explicitly intimate conversations between men and women. But we'll couch that for now.
yeah.
It's just very interesting and worth mentioning.
Uh,
But we'll get into Alfred Baldwin III later.
yeah. All
But
right. Okay. So if there's still more you want to hit on the official narrative, because I did want to back up and kind of talk about the political landscape of the time, but I didn't mean to
right.
cut you off.
No,
I
it'll
thought you
feed
were.
into it. This will
Okay, go
feed
for it.
right into it, I
Yep.
think.
There, go for it.
So, subsequent investigations and revelations during the trials, that is what prompted the U.S. House of Representatives to grant the House Judiciary Committee expanded investigative authority, which is what led to the Senate Watergate Committee, right? And that's what led to the conducting of the hearings, and which were all televised, right? And so again, it's like it's really just stole the attention of the mass public at this time. Like it really did, especially as it played out over time. And so because you start to see that loyalties become very strained very quickly, and so key witnesses testified that Nixon had sanctioned plans to cover up his administration's involvement in the burglary, and that there was a voice activated taping system in the Oval Office. Now, Nixon's natural instinct was to basically leverage the CIA to help shut down the investigations And so he kind of wanted Helms to twist the arm of Hoover and the FBI, and really William Sullivan, and different there is kind of, you know, faction within the FBI as well, that's sort of internally disputing different goals at this time that were a little bit more in line with the CIA, right? And so, and that we'll get into as well. But so it captivated the public interest. I mean, it really did at this time, you know. And so, beyond the televised Senate Watergate hearings, um, I mean, we have numerous revelations and Nixon's efforts to impede the investigation in '73, which led the House to initiate impeachment proceedings against him. And then the Supreme Court's ruling compelled Nixon to surrender the Oval Office tapes. And that was the smoking gun, right? Because once the Oval Office tapes were surrendered to the Watergate Senate committee, um, I mean, it was basically over, because you can hear him. First of all, if you listen to the tapes, like, people need to realize, like, a lot of the top officials in the Nixon administration had no fucking idea what was going on. Like, they didn't they didn't even know why the break-in was was ordered, right? Which Nixon himself is very confused, it seems, on the tapes. And but he's clearly implicated, and clearly he's involved in trying to run a cover-up operation in regard to this, because that seemed to just be his natural instinct, which I find, it makes sense to me, honestly. But anyway, so at that point, I mean, it really did expose his complicity in the cover up. So the House Judiciary Committee approved 3 articles of impeachment against Nixon, who subsequently resigned from office on August 9th, 1974, becoming the only U.S. president to ever do so.
Well,
And so,
his big thing was not wanting to release the tapes,
mhm,
and he was trying to. This is where we get a lot of. Sometimes we'll hear political discussions about what executive privilege, I believe, or something, and so
yep,
this has kind of become like a legal thing.
yep.
I think in the end, wasn't he able to somehow? I don't know if he was able to hold some back, or I know there were ones that they said, "Oh, those magically
There was
disappeared."
a huge scandal over like
Yeah,
18 and a half minutes that were, yeah,
yeah,
that were just erased on the tapes. And
yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know who ordered that eraser, or erasure as well, which is a very interesting connection into all of this.
Hmm.
And but so his successor was Gerald Ford,
Yeah.
and he pardoned him on September 8th,
And there was
1974.
shenanigans with getting Ford in place too, wasn't there? Or am I maybe I'm conflating with something
I'm
else?
trying to remember, because I know that I can't remember the details,
I think there
honestly,
was
on the
some sort
Ford
of
replacement.
shenanigans where, and maybe I'm mixing up. Maybe I'm thinking of the JFK situation. No, JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson was his VP at the time, and that's
Yeah.
so. But I think wasn't Gerald Ford either not the VP when this all started and kind of shuffled into place,
Oh yeah,
something along those lines.
it was the what was his first name?
Yeah, there was a
Um
former VP.
Agnew. Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
you
almost like
remember.
they were kind of. It almost seemed convenient that that guy got moved out of place when it looked like the
100%.
king
Yeah.
was going to be swapped out. They're like, well, you can't be it, you know.
Right,
So,
right. And he
yeah,
was already compromised by, which we'll get into later. He
yep.
had been compromised by sexual blackmail, and
Hmm. Many
but
such cases, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and he ended up having to step down over accepting bribes,
Hmm.
as the VP, which is pretty crazy. And there's bodies attached to him as far as kind of trying to
Yeah.
cover things up. Yeah, and I believe his girlfriend, Spencer Agnew, I think, was the name of the original VP, initial VP. But um, yeah, that's a crazy story. I might be wrong on his first name. I can't remember now. It's a strange
I just
name.
find it unique I just find it unique in this situation because it's like this guy got put into place at the same time it was almost like chess pieces being moved put into place,
100%, dude.
so it was kind of
That's
like
how
okay.
a
I mean,
lot
yeah,
of this.
I mean, sure, you can say it's coincidence and two separate things happen at the same time.
Right.
The number one and the number two both got swapped out roughly around the same time, but it's like
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, if you want to connect some dots, it's like that looks a little weird.
No doubt,
So,
man.
yeah. Yeah.
100%, dude.
Which on the political climate, I would just listen to a thing with Nick Bryan because think we mentioned just a little bit ago. He has a book out, and he was on Lou Dobbs, and he was talking about the political situation. And it sounds to me that, I mean, I'm no historian in Nixon's administration, but it
Hmm.
sounds to me like he kind of pulled like a JFK light, where he,
Easing
because
tensions.
yeah, well, JFK
Yeah.
did that thing where he kind of first came in, and there's a lot of hubbub about like rumors about him having links to the mob, and that's kind of what got him
Mm.
in place. But then obviously it's very renowned that once he got in place, he became very adversarial with the mob, with him and his brother. And the mob is also in a lot of ways borderline synonymous with intelligence. So he kind
Right.
of created a whole slew of enemies during that time. But essentially, the idea that he almost was a Trojan horse, and that the mob thought, "Oh, this guy's gonna go in here and be our guy,"
Oh yeah.
and then he kind of Order 66'd him. And it
Yeah.
sounds like Nixon, from my understanding, was similar in a lot of ways, and that he
He had
thought he
deep
was kind of
ties
a
to the
company.
mob too. Yeah.
Well, they thought he was a company man, and he was going to play the game when it came to certain like say like foreign policy stuff. But I believe he was, if I recall correctly, I think he was wanting to kind of like ease relations with Russia and stuff at a time
That's
where that
exactly
wasn't
what happened.
popular.
Yeah.
A lot like, I guess you can make comparisons with like Trump and stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, he was bucking the establishment's foreign policy line big time, I
He
believe.
was very much upsetting the intelligence community during this
Yeah.
time, and like you're saying, one of those major factors was that he signed this National Security Decision Memorandum 2. They called it NSDM 2, and that this is when he began really easing tensions with China and the Soviet
Oh
Union,
yeah, it
and
was
did
China
like
too, I believe. Yeah.
yep,
Sorry, going
yep,
back. Yeah.
and the Soviet Union, and did because it was Nixon, right, that opened the door to China and allowed relations with Mao at that time, right, under the Kissinger kind of doctrine, sort of. But it's weird because I find this very interesting because it almost feels like he was at odds with at least Kissinger's mentor. So it's very interesting how this played out. But um, so he basically started easing tensions with China, doing weapons deals even with the Soviet Union, and he was using Vietnam all the while as like a bargaining chip throughout this time. And meanwhile, he's bombing the shit out of Vietnam too. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's not like
Yeah, I'm not saying this guy's perfect. I mean, I would even say
he
the
was
same thing about
bleeding us
JFK.
out in
Many
Vietnam.
people, many people
Yeah,
rightfully, point out with JFK a lot of his flaws and a lot of bad foreign policy decisions
yeah,
and this and that.
definitely.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying any of these guys are my ideal madcap president, but I'm saying so far as same thing with Trump. Trump,
Right.
clearly there was an attempt at a coup, and I guess you can make a case whether it was whether it's successful or not while he was in office, and yeah,
Mhm.
that's. I mean, you can definitely say, and I by no means say he's a perfect either, but like it's. I mean, you're kind of bringing out like the Kissinger thing, and like the kind of the idea that like yeah, you can have establishment characters that have two different plans in mind, and neither of those are necessarily the correct plan, but they can still go at odds and they can clash,
Oh
and
yeah,
things like major events that shift landscapes can happen as a result.
definitely.
So yeah, I think that's so that's no by no means saying that whatever. I don't know. I'm sure somebody could be like, well, his foreign policy here, this foreign policy there, but it's like, well, he was clearly trying to make political moves that certain other political people didn't like.
Yeah.
That's all. The only point I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to say he was on the straight and narrow on what fucking decisions he should be making, because no, I mean, there's not really any politician that say did that. So
That was that NSDM2, by the way, that National Security Decision Memorandum. That is also, I got it wrong when I was initially saying it was the National Defense Authorization Act or something. So it was actually this NSDM is where Nixon had the clause in it where it kept Helms from, he was like barely able to even be in the national security briefing, and then he would have to leave. It was like they were at war. They were at
mm,
odds with each other, Nixon and Helms, Richard Helms, who was running the CIA during this time. And it's pretty extraordinary to the level it really gets. I mean, even on the tapes, man, like it gets crazy. And so clearly he's largely defying the political will of the intelligence community, at this
mm,
time. I mean, it seems that way. It really does. And he almost, I feel like he thinks that he has the leverage in a lot
yeah,
of these situations, man. I mean, he's flexing his muscle. He really is. Like, it's pretty crazy what he says to Helms on some of the tapes.
Yeah.
And I mean, so
Real
this,
quick, not to jump the
yeah.
shark, but do you
Hmm.
think Nixon was a predator, or do you think he just had information on people? Because I guess this kind of goes to our conversation, and obviously we're jumping way ahead. This kind of
Hmm.
goes to our conversation we're just having, where it's like he clearly was bucking establishment lines, but I'm trying to make the
Right.
point that doesn't mean he's a good guy. He
Yeah,
just may
exactly.
be on different wavelengths between some other bad guys,
Definitely.
and as
Yeah.
as a result, they've come to a crossroads.
Hmm.
So,
I have
uh,
I have yet to find a reason to doubt what Fiona Barnett claims about
yeah,
what Nixon did to her. So I do kind of lean toward, I certainly think it's possible.
yeah. I just
But
know I've heard in a lot of stories too when it comes to those sort of things. A
mhm,
lot of times, whether there's truth to it or not, a lot, and because it makes sense that there'd be truth to it. This is where a lot of times talk about like people talk about like white hats and black hats within like
yeah,
intelligence. So the white hats are the ones who see these sort of things are disgusted and long for a better, more idealized version of their fucking intel agency or whatever the fuck.
right, right,
And to be fair, okay, sure, maybe there are some people who bought the Kool-Aid and yeah,
mhm,
they see these awful things and they go, "Holy fuck!" And like, yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense that there would be people that would have those tendencies, and maybe
definitely,
even some of them may have, dipped their pen in a little bit of sin as well. But I mean, this is the Intel game where it's
yep,
like, and now they get to have this circular logic where they're like, oh well, this is so I can get in good and bust these guys. But like, you're just kind of
yeah,
doing sort of the same thing they're doing. But
exactly, man.
so I don't know.
Mm,
It's a mind fuck, but it just I don't know. It just made me think of that, just kind of that concept that
mhm,
I mean, even if he wasn't engaged in it, he was kind of like he was literally holding onto this information literally just for political leverage. So like even if you want to make the case he's a white hat and he's playing some crazy long game, it's like I don't know. It seems more transactional and more like a
yeah,
utilitarian. Like I know these people's tendencies and I'm going to use it against
exactly,
them.
yep,
So and that now whether you want to say he's involved in those things himself or not, that's a different story. I don't know.
mhm.
So, but yeah. Anyways, to the point that I'm not necessarily saying he's a good guy.
Right, right. I know, man. And I had mentioned Kissinger's mentor, who plays I think he's a huge factor in this as well. And his name was Fritz Kramer. All right. And this guy, he even told Nixon that, like, he basically was speaking to him like he was a child, and he went to him and said, "You can't pull out of Vietnam." Like, he literally told him that he would look weak, to the public. And so, and he Fritz Kramer is, man, he's absolutely an extraordinary story, this guy, because it seems like, I mean, first of all, he's the one who in like the 1940s allegedly discovered Henry Kissinger in the first place. And then he was like, he had recruited um Kissinger into the army division, all right? And Kramer persuaded Kissinger to attend Harvard University. He shaped Kissinger's reading and thinking. This is a quote from Kissinger. Kramer shaped my reading and thinking, influenced my choice of college, awakened my interest in political philosophy and history, inspired both my undergraduate and graduate thesis, and became an integral and indispensable part of my life. That's Henry Kissinger. And other people, even Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, they all worship this guy. I mean, there's an insane quote by Donald Rumsfeld where he says, like, he holds the black flame. And it made me think of the Setian doctrine of Michael Aquino, because that's what they literally call it, the black flame. I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, I don't know. Maybe there's
Yeah.
something additional to pull on there, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, that might be that kind of information that's behind the veil that you don't really you
100%.
can surmise, but what we probably may never know for sure. So,
Exactly.
like what kind of weird dark going ons.
No doubt. And one of the key players in all of this and how it inevitably played out is Alexander Haig, right? And he was, after the huge scandal, he's named as Nixon's White House chief of staff. And he basically ran the country for like 15 months, right? Like, it's kind of insane, the story. I think somebody's writing a book about that. Like, The 15-Month President is what it's called, I think, actually, if I can recall. And so, yeah, not only did this guy discover a young Henry Kissinger, he discovers Alexander Haig. And
Yeah.
and
He's
and
the
so
lizard people's emissary is what he
that's
is.
what it looks like, man. It was tripping me out reading all,
Yeah.
through this, but
Yeah.
but
That's the dude, the inner Earth Greys send is their mouth of Sauron to
exactly, man.
us fucking peasants.
100%, dude.
Yeah.
So he he recommends Haig as the military assistant to then National Security Advisor Kissinger, right? And so, and by the way, Kramer's son also served in the Nixon Kissinger National Security Council. But from the early 1950s until 78, when Kramer retired from civil service, he served as senior civilian advisor to the U.S. Army Chief of Staff in the Pentagon and influenced the Department of Defense during the Cold War. And during his time at the Pentagon, he also influenced Secretaries of Defense James Schlesinger and Donald Rumsfeld. He served on the White House National Security Staff under 10 presidents. I was just like, yeah, that's okay. What is
The
it?
company man,
Unelected
man.
bureaucrats,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got the butt fucking pictures of all the presidents. So
And by the
yeah,
way, you mentioned that so many of these players are gay, and I don't get it, but it
yeah.
seems like it's a huge blackmail tool at this time, you know?
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, it is. We talked to Nick when we had him on our show, just kind of like the kind of people, and I'm not even necessarily saying, homosexuality means you're bad, but it's also like, it's the idea of things that were at certain points in time, frowned upon behavior, and then also, straight up degeneracy as well, but like just kind of
oh
like
yeah,
the kind of people that you're going to get that are involved in these are going to be people that have dirt on them as well, or that can fit into these realms of society they need to infiltrate.
yeah,
So I mean, like, obviously now the homosexuality angle has almost no power to it. I mean, I'm sure, like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure if someone was able to get dirt on like Mike Pence doing gay stuff, then like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. It completely ruins his image.
yeah,
But any new up and comings, it's losing its power. But
mhm,
10, 20 years ago, if you were a Fruit Loop CIA agent and you got with some big highfalutin person of interest or whatever, some politician,
right.
that's legitimate leverage, like, that
Oh
can be
yeah,
used to your benefit. So it's kind of
definitely.
like the kind of people, the kind of players that you're going to get involved are going to be ones that usually hang out in the, and even then, on top of it, they're also the ones that are willing to weaponize that. So, like,
Right.
and to the point where I'm like, I'm not even saying homosexuality is a bad thing. I know I make a lot of jokes at Tower Gang and stuff, but it's like, these are also the homosexuals that have no problem using that as a cudgel against people.
Exactly.
Like, if the thing that's also that's obviously likely true about them, unless they just aren't even
Mhm.
gay and are just willing to do that just for the mission. I guess they could make. Although I'd say that's pretty gay, but
Definitely, dude.
I mean,
That's
you can lie
hilarious.
to yourself and tell yourself that. I guess I don't know if you're
Right.
just that good of a CIA agent, but yeah, no, there's something gross about that. Like, these are not only the people that hang out in the dregs of society; they're the
Yeah,
ones perfectly content with being the dregs of society and persecuting the dregs of society.
yeah,
That
definitely. Yeah,
so it's like, what kind of person are you?
exactly.
Like, it's the idea that, like, if I was like, if I had a coke addiction and I hung out with unsavory people, I'd be like, I'm engaging in this behavior, and I would feel wrong about ratting out those people.
Right.
But to, like, literally sign up to be like, I want to beat the rat, you're like, dude, you're a piece of shit.
For
Especially when
real,
you're like,
man.
these are behaviors I like to engage in. So you're like,
Mhm.
okay, all
Yep.
right. So I don't know.
Yeah, it
Sorry,
blows
go
me
on.
away, man. No, you're good.
Yeah.
To finish just a couple more notes on this Kramer, man, Fitz Kramer is just an insane story, man, because he's also considered to be the real Doctor Strangelove, which I've heard about a few people, so it's kind of a composite character that that Kubrick made about a lot of these Rand Corporation guys, and you know, and a lot of the Brookings Institute guys too, who and so but he was specifically described as the father of the neoconservative movement in US foreign policy, and was um like he had this theory called the provocative weakness theory. And he basically says that um you know, if you come to negotiate, if you come to the table to negotiate, you just, like, he basically says don't negotiate, come with a loaded gun and point it at their head. That's what he says, right? Like, this is who Fritz Kramer is.
Yeah,
Right.
the ultimate Chad.
Definitely, man. It's so crazy to me.
I will not debate.
Right. So insane. But
Yeah.
so he graduated the National War College, right? Advised, taught, and inspired generations of officers, officials, American presidents. And so, yeah, like I said, described as Dr. Strangelove and Kissinger's Kissinger. That was one of my favorites that I saw. And he was
Can you imagine a
apparently
little Kissinger's Kissinger? Like, he's already like a deformed little like chicken nugget of a human being.
I
Can you
know.
imagine if he had his own little chicken nugget of a human being beside him? Sorry, stupid thought. Go on.
So he was apparently like flamboyant and eccentric as well, and he wore a monocle, and it like became his trademark. And
That's pretty
so
dope, actually.
oh my god, dude. But anyway, so he
This is in the, like the 80s?
yeah, well, yeah.
Rocking a monocle in the
No.
80s? That is a solid
Dude,
fashion choice.
apparently he was invited, like, when they were launching the war in Iraq in '01. He was invited to the
Wait,
one. He went to the
what's the
Pentagon and then
fashion
to the
style?
White House.
We talking like Elton John? Because you say he's flamboyant. Like, what are we talking
Right.
about? Or was
Dude,
that
I
kind
don't
of
know.
stuff?
I mean,
All right, now
I
I want to
ha
look at pictures of this
I know I
guy.
need to look at him honestly, because I've
It's
only
like, how are you
read
pulling
about
off
his
a monocle running
Yeah.
through like Intel, like, and running around this world?
Right. That is
Uh,
hilarious.
yeah, I don't
But
know. I can imagine it, an 80s style
right.
monocle. But all right, go ahead.
Well, he founded, like, just a think tank that, you know, fits the bill, you know, clearly. It's called the World Security Network Foundation. And it was a think tank specifically for global affairs, and had like 22 generals and admirals involved in the think tank. And became one of the largest think tanks in all of global affairs, basically. But that I felt like we should at least establish who that was, because according to Lynn Kolodny, I mean, he was a huge like, I mean, influence, right? And he wrote a book called uh, besides writing Silent Coup, he wrote this book called 40 Years War, and it really kind of details the kind of this war that Nixon had with Helms, and what led to a lot of this. And yeah, and he really does think that Fritz Kramer played a huge role in one, Kissinger and Alexander Haig's, like, just his influence on them throughout this time. And so that's an interesting read. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but what I've read of it, it's like brilliant, man. And it's like, it's really blowing my mind. So he's a super valuable source for all this. But anyway, beyond that, I mean, it's all of, like, when you get into who the original Watergate 7 were, and like what exactly happened there, because it really kind of refers to 14 different people, like two groups of 7, because it was like uh, it was the burglars themselves with the 2 handlers, right? Because there were 5
Yeah.
people, but so we should at least cover. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, spoiler alert. I think like like almost half of them are confirmed feds.
Yeah, well, all the 5,
Glowies.
right, yeah, and I mean, honestly, man, like the 7 who were involved in the break-in, other than G. Gordon Liddy, he's the only one who's not directly CIA Bay of Pigs guys, right? So that alone is outrageous. And I'll introduce the key players really quickly because I find it interesting what happens as far as when G. Gordon Liddy like introduced Howard Hunt and James McCord, who we're about to talk about. They act as if they don't know each other, but they have a past, right? They know each other very well, and I find that alone, very interesting and a crucial detail. But yeah, so by the way, after Nixon was pardoned by Gerald Ford, right? Um, the Watergate scandal ultimately resulted in like 69 indictments, and I think it was like 48 convictions is what the end result was. And I mean, it was several of them were high-ranking officials from Nixon's administration, right? And like I said, man, like there were quite a few who were entirely unaware of what exactly this plot was and even the reason behind the break-in. And it seems like um, White House aide John Dean, who we'll get into as well, he's a very big key player in this. Um, it really seems like he was being very dishonest with Nixon after the break-in, and so he kind of he starts to become like the main factor in helping Nixon in the cover up, and then he immediately flips key witness, and it's yeah, it's nuts. But I think he might have been compromised, so we're gonna have to touch on that. But so anyway, the infamous Watergate 7, like I said, refers to two different groups involved in this scandal. And the original five caught in the burglary, along with their two handlers, who are E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy. I really believe that Hunt and McCord were more in charge of what was happening on the ground than Gordon Liddy was ever aware of, and I think that maybe Gordon Liddy wasn't even aware of the secondary agenda that was playing out as well. So anyway, they were all tried before Judge John Sirica in like early 1973. And so then the second group it applies to are these 7 advisors and White House aides to the president who were subsequently indicted by a grand jury. I think it was early March in 74. And so Nixon himself, that's when he was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, and that was unprecedented, right? Like never happened in the history. And so original Watergate 7 and their legal dispositions are: 1, G. Gordon Liddy, former FBI agent, general counsel for the Committee to Re-elect the President, CRP, creep, convicted of burglary, conspiracy, and wiretapping, and sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison, served 4.5 years in prison. He had the longest sentence, right? Then you have E. Howard Hunt, who was a CIA operative, deeply involved in Operation 40 and the Kennedy assassination, and also, I mean, many other things. I mean, my God, the guy was involved in the Che assassination and execution, and like also he was involved in oh, here it is, coup, like yeah, with the coup in Iran, right? The coup in Guatemala, overthrowing our Benz, um, and and Allende in Chile, right? Which
Dude got around.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
I mean, and by the way, he was involved with, and I think I've mentioned this to you once, but he's involved in this highly secretive office in the CIA called the Office of Security. And
Hmm.
it was the only section in the entire agency that reported directly to Helms,
Yeah,
right?
and that was what a lot of people kind of refer to as kind of like the off-book CIA, essentially. That was kind of like
Dude.
they were creating two CIAs at the time. That's kind of
Yep.
why I think this slice of history that we're dissecting is kind of interesting. I think there were a lot of
Yep.
weird stuff going on with the CIA at that time.
I
Obviously, there's
agree.
always a lot of weird stuff going on, but I think they were at some sort of odd crossroads between all the JFK stuff, the Nixon stuff. They were really they were kind of playing fast and loose with trying to orchestrate things to their on their behalf around
Hmm.
that period of time, like big
Oh
time,
yeah.
like domestically, like
Yes.
like and not just like toppling countries, elsewhere. They're like
Yeah.
literally like fucking with, the arrangement of the key players in our state, like
Hmm.
that type
Yeah.
of stuff. So
Yeah. And this was right around the exact same time that Operation Chaos was greenlit. So everybody needs to keep that in mind, right? Because that
yeah,
is clearly the CIA's version of the FBI's COINTELPRO, which is
yeah,
just
yeah.
domestic operations. I mean, that's what it is.
Mm.
Create. I mean, you read what Chaos was. It's PatCon. It's the same
Yeah.
as when you read what COINTELPRO
They
was.
just they just do more like cutout type things to get
Yeah,
further away from it. So that's why you have
exactly.
this splinter cell of the CIA with the
Right.
Office of Security or whatever, and
Right.
then from there, then they have their own separate cutouts. So it's like
Yeah.
so compartmentalized that it's
Yeah.
and then
Oh,
you just
and
get to a point where like, yeah, well, technically CIA is not supposed to act domestically, but this guy's in the
right.
he's like in this super secret spot that we're like isolating this information, and even from there, now he's working within this private entity that
Uh-huh.
but then he distanced
Mullen and
himself
Company
by
for Howard Hunt.
so yeah, so exactly, there you
Proven
go.
CIA front company,
Yeah,
but his third retirement from the agency. So everybody just
yeah, I mean,
rest
this is where
assured.
the office security, if I recall correctly, I believe is kind of tied into a lot of like the Wacken Hut and that type of,
Oh
so it's like
yeah.
they were almost setting up the infrastructure for a separate
Hmm.
CIA, and it almost was like the office of security was kind of like the hub,
Yeah.
to where they were kind of creating their private network of
Yeah.
their private CIA, which is
Yeah,
obviously it's
man.
publicly funded, but it's just that
Hmm.
they're doing the same exact activities, but through their private entities that they or their friends own or operate.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it blows my mind.
Mhm.
And so Howard Hunt, he did, and by the way, he's, like I said, CIA operative, leader of the White House plumbers, convicted of burglary, conspiracy, and wiretapping as well. And he was sentenced to 2.5 years to 8 years in prison, but only served 33 months. Right. And so then you have Bernard Barker, member of the plumbers, FBI agent, alleged CIA undercover operative, which he was. He was a member of Bay of Pigs as well. And E. Howard Hunt went under codename Eduardo and during Op 40 Bay of Pigs, and the Cubans looked at him as a legend. And we'll get into that because Eugenio Martinez, I think he's one of the most interesting. Like, yeah, he doesn't say everything, but he really sheds what just a such a valuable perspective and window into what happened on the ground in the burglaries and how suspicious even he was, right? As to how it went down, how it occurred, operational procedures on the ground level. He was just like blown away. And I love his perspective at the very least, even if he is the one with the key to Ida Maxwell's desk that we'll talk about later as well, which he tried to swallow when Carl Schaffler was like beating his ass. But anyway, that story gets crazy. But Bernard Barker, all right, like I said, member of the plumbers, CIA undercover operative. He
Real
pled
quick,
guilty.
the
Yeah.
plumbers. What even is that? Because like as I said, I've done
Mhm.
not because I hear that and I'm like, is that literally just like an organization that is like calls themselves like they're the ones who do the plumbing in the White House or some shit? Like,
It
because
was
like
so
I don't know.
I specifically detail it here in a moment, but
Okay.
it's just a group under the Committee to Reelect the President that was basically it was created just after the Ellsberg leaks.
Mm.
And so when that was published, right, the Ellsberg papers, the Pentagon papers as
Yeah,
soon
yeah.
as it was published within a week, less than a week, the White House plumbers were created, and they were called the plumbers, and they made it a joke. It was supposed to be covert as hell, and it
Yeah.
turns out that Hunt and Liddy and McCord made a plaque that said we're the plumbers and put it in
Yeah.
the fucking White House.
The joke being like we're plumbers, like,
We're plugging
we're
leaks.
plumbing. Oh,
Yeah,
we're
and
kind of
also we're
like
plugging
espionage
leaks.
type. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, which was the main thing, and I believe it can't remember who it was one of the operatives' mothers who said this as a joke when the guy went home. I read about it. I can't remember who it was, but that's how they adopted this nickname. It's so ridiculous, but
Because I think a lot of
Anyway,
people actually hear about the plumbers and they literally think that there were actual people
actual
posing as
plumbers.
plumbers. No, I do think people. So I think there is this like subtle thing that people then tie that into like in their head, like espionage, like some guy
Right.
pretending to be a maintenance worker.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
I don't know. I think there's some association there because
No.
I've definitely I think of like plumbers and my mind does like word association with like Intel. So
Mhm.
and I think like like oh this guy just happened to be the guy doing your fucking satellite work that day. You know what I mean? Like or whatever the thing is.
Right, right.
Everyone's like all schizophrenic, like, oh, that's fucking Intel. Like, so I get that idea from it. But okay, so they
Definitely.
legit were just some made up fucking company, or
No,
like,
they were just, an organization that was made within the, internalized intelligence operation that was greenlit in the White House. It wasn't they wanted to it and, again, I detail exactly the reason here in just a moment because it's specifically has to do with this internal struggle, this war against the CIA, and the FBI is not helping Nixon at this time either. They're kind of, dragging their feet in many ways. They don't want to actually help him with his domestic spying. That he really wants to crack down on dissidents. He's pushing hard um, for domestic spying, and and they were okay with that, but they wanted in full reign of in full control of it. They didn't want to be doing it as Nixon's bitch, basically, is kind of the what the scenario was, right? And especially when they were at odds at this time. And so Nixon felt like he didn't have an intelligence agency he could rely on. And so he created one himself under this private intelligence operation within the White House.
oh, the
And it's
plumbers?
basically
That's what or is that
no,
what
it
you're
falls
saying?
within the
Oh,
committee to
okay, okay,
reelect the president is
gotcha,
what it
gotcha.
really falls under. And
Hmm.
the plumbers are a part of that, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
obviously they were undermining him, but they were kind of
well,
yeah.
certain members were, right?
Yes.
And again, it's very compartmentalized even within this
Yep.
group,
It's Intel
and
games. Yeah, you can tell when I mean I've listened to your coverage of it, and you can tell there are people getting different information,
mhm.
and some people may be more in the know than others, and yeah, it is like people. It's like an op within an op within an op. Like
Dude,
it really is
conspiracy
these
inside of
spy
a
games.
conspiracy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really is these spy games. You're like, oh my god, like yeah, they're like setting up this one guy within it. That's like, oh yeah, he's the fall.
Yep.
Oh, we know you're going to take the fall or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you can tell they're getting limited information. But yeah, either way,
Exactly.
yeah, bizarre. But I'll let you go
Very
on.
much so. You're
Yeah.
good. Um, so yeah, Barker was inevitably sentenced to 18 months to 6 years, and that was for the first charge. Reversed his plea and served 18 months in prison, and later sentenced to 2.5 to 6 years in prison for the second charge, and served one additional year in prison. And so that was Barker, one of the member of the plumbers and one of the burglars at the Watergate, and he was CIA undercover operative involved in Bay of Pigs. He also was one of the main guys who, even when Eugenio Martinez later starts to distrust Howard Hunt, uh, Bernard Barker is blind to it. Like in the way Eugenio explains it, he basically says that Bernard just almost worshipped him as a legend, and you couldn't even see it as a possibility that Howard would potentially, kind of, be disloyal to them and throw them under in this way. And so Virgilio Gonzalez was a Cuban refugee, one of the Bay of Pigs guys, and locksmith. All right, he was convicted of conspiracy, burglary, and wiretapping like all the rest, and sentenced to 1 to 4 years in prison, serving 13 months. Eugenio Martinez was also Cuban exile, CIA undercover operative, and he was sentenced to 1 to 4 years, serving 15 months, pardoned by Ronald Reagan, which I thought was interesting. And so then James McCord, former CIA officer, FBI agent, convicted on 8 counts of conspiracy, burglary, and wiretapping, sentenced to 25 years in prison, reduced to 1 to 5 years in prison after he implicated others in the plot, served only 4 months. So he was one of the key witnesses who flipped with John Dean. Yeah. So, beyond being a former CIA, he just like Howard Hunt, he just happened to retire from the CIA very recently, and he was also a member of the Office of Security, the highly secretive group within, directly reporting to Helms. So it's just like, man, come on now,
No
it,
fucking
it
way.
it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so Frank Sturgis, he was a legitimate CIA hitman, and I mean, you can say that about Hunt too. He killed people as well. I mean, but but so Sturgis, he was really heavily involved in wet works though, and he was a guerrilla trainer as well. And like he so he inevitably was separately charged of transporting stolen cars to Mexico and sentenced to 1 to 4 years in prison. But the sentence for the transport charge was folded into the Watergate sentence. And I guess due to his cooperation. And so he served only 14 months, right, for both charges. And so then to quickly establish the 7 advisors that are also considered under this Watergate 7 was John Mitchell, former United States Attorney General, director of Nixon's 68 to 72 election campaigns, and faced a maximum of 30 years in prison and $42,000 in fines. And on February 1975, Mitchell was found guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and perjury, and sentenced to 2.5 to 8 years in prison, which was reduced to 1 to 4 years, and he actually served like 19 months. Then we have H.R. Haldeman, White House Chief of Staff, considered the second most powerful man in the government during Nixon's first term, faced a maximum of 25 years in prison and $16,000 in fines. In 1975, he would be convicted of conspiracy, obstruction, receiving 18-month sentence. And when Haldeman stepped down, because Nixon was kind of forced to fire a lot of his staff after this all went public, Haldeman basically claims he made a serious mistake, and he told Nixon, and he suggested to Nixon that he should replace him, Haldeman, as White House Chief of Staff with Alexander Haig. And yeah, that doesn't work out very well for Nixon, right? And so Haldeman, I think, was a real supporter and loyal to Nixon. I think they were actual friends, and he had kind of his best interests at heart. But clearly they were all being deceived in many ways, like especially the individuals who were unaware of the secret agenda, which included Nixon himself clearly. And so John Ehrlichman was the third of the 7 of the aides, right? The advisors. And so Ehrlichman was former assistant to Nixon in charge of domestic affairs. And so he was inevitably, I think he served like 18 months as well. And then Charles Colson, he brought in Howard Hunt and was actually he actually was a classmate with Howard Hunt at Brown University and knew him personally. And so he was a former White House counsel and specializing in political affairs. And so he ended up being sentenced to 1 to 3 years and fined $5,000, serving like 7 months. So then it's like 3 additional aides: Gordon C. Strachan, Robert Mardian, and Kenneth Parkinson. And they were all involved with the committee to reelect the president, right? And was a lawyer, and Parkinson was, and so, and was kind of like G. Gordon Liddy's counsel, and so those were basically what's referred to as the Watergate 7, which is really 14 people inside Nixon's administration at this
Mhm.
time, which are heavily implicated in the committee to reelect the president and this private intelligence operation within the White House that we keep referencing. And so more it's like it really begins to make a lot more sense whenever you start to understand the landscape, because you have to keep in mind like the dishonest framework of the Watergate affair, right? Like, I mean, it's basically the time the government got it right in a way,
Mhm.
right? Like by exposing and rooting out internal corruption in the form of Nixon's symbolic downfall. And it's just a fairy tale, man. Like it really is, and I
Mhm.
can't believe that. Well, I
Yeah,
can. I
this is
mean,
what's
damn.
held up as no one's above the law. Like, and it's
Exactly.
like, oh well, you guys completely swapped the frame on that, and it was a complete distortion. Like, sort of, but
100%.
I know that's not the takeaway you really should get from that. So,
No.
but yeah.
So Nixon had gone to both the CIA, right, and the FBI requesting assistance in running surveillance operations against various political dissidents and prominent individuals who were in opposition of his administration. And so basically the story goes that he allegedly received pushback from both Helms and Hoover, who were seemingly unwilling to aid Nixon in his domestic surveillance operations without certain conditions being met, which they were just demanding flat out to even help him in general, like when it came to this. And I found that like just it doesn't, I mean, of course it makes sense because I mean Hoover, I mean, damn, that guy was in there for how long? Right? Like it's absolutely crazy to me, and especially with how this played out, because he died during all of this, Hoover. And William Sullivan was kind of like his number two, besides Mark Felt was really the number two. But Mark Felt was like almost in agreement with Hoover in regard to giving the CIA all this cover, and and so Felt got passed over when it came to, he was supposed to be the replacement for Hoover, and that just wasn't in the cards at this time, right? And I think that they were pretty much overruled and the CIA took the day in a way. But um it played a major factor, right? Like,
Mhm.
and especially in Nixon's decision to set up this private intelligence operation out of the White House, I mean, just in general to form the committee to reelect the president,
Mhm.
and so, and that began around late 1970, right? When that's exactly around the time you can trace this, and I mean, this committee to reelect the president was almost overtly, but I mean clearly covertly, but was engaging in money laundering and slush funds, and like used it. The CRP used $500,000 in the legal expenses for the 5 Watergate burglars. So, it's like they're directly connected to every aspect of this, right? And here's a huge reason why the public just entirely believed that Nixon was to blame for this, and he was clearly behind the break-in, and because it was fed as right, just getting dirt on political rivals, like we said earlier, and so the White House plumber unit, it also began as a part of this operation just at this same time, and just so happened to be established in June of 71. And like I said earlier, within a week of the publication of the Pentagon Papers, which is there's not a coincidence there, especially when the first break-in is Dr. Fielding's office, and that is literally the psychiatrist for Daniel Ellsberg, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's just ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So, um, a few of the key members of the plumbers unit, right, were the CIA hitman Frank Sturgis, ex FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy, who, by the way, he's apparently famous for the arrest of Timothy Leary. which I was like,
The actor?
that's a little strange,
Wait, the
But
actor, or am I thinking of somebody else?
no, Timothy Leary, what is it?
Who am I thinking of?
Tune in something and drop out. I can't remember what it is, but he's the MK Ultra all day long, like connected to
Oh,
the
yeah, that guy. Yeah,
counterculture.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he was one of those that were a key in kind of the LSD experience of that age, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, Timothy Leary, I think
I think it's Dennis Leary. Maybe that's who it is. Maybe there's an actor
oh
named Dennis Leary.
oh shit, what is that dude's name? Now that
Yeah.
Anyway, doesn't matter, but I
Anyways,
know who you're
side point.
talking
Yeah,
about.
I was like, what dot are you trying to connect me here with that guy getting arrested?
Well, the
Okay.
Timothy Leary thing is
Yeah.
that he's so deeply involved in like the Laurel Canyon scene, the MK Ultra scene in San Francisco at the time, in the Hate Ashbury and the process, and like he's
Yeah.
deeply tied in with the mamas and the papas too, and oh my God, by the way, Alexander Butterfield, who he later comes up as one of the, I guess he was really the guy that was tapped on the shoulder, in my opinion, based on the direction of Alexander Haig, who, according to Lynn Kolodny, was using Bob Woodward as the cat's paw at this time. He was using Woodward to suggest to the Watergate Senate Select Committee to um, interview and interrogate um, uh, dude, it gets so freaking crazy because it's Butterfield who's the only guy who can actually make public the existence of the White House taping system. It's just like, oh my God, that's no coincidence either, man. Like in no way, in my opinion, right? And again, it'll make more sense as we go, but
Mm.
it's just extraordinary story, man. Like how it's very complicated because there's so many moving parts, but it's really not as hard to understand once you start to realize just what exactly was playing out as far as the
Yeah.
power dynamic.
Mm.
I really think it's one of the most important aspects of all of this because I don't think it would have happened otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Like I think, well, I don't want to get off the fence yet, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, are
So
we? So, I mean, we're kind of set the landscape. Are we at a
Mhm.
point? I think next episode we want to kind of get into the robbery itself and how that
Right.
got into it. Do you think
Yep.
we're at a good point to pull the cord now, or I mean, you let
Um,
me know if you
Let
want to
me finish
craft more
this
of the
one little part.
landscape. All
Yeah,
right, go
just
for it.
this one little part about because I at least want to get us up into the point of Operation Gemstone,
Mm-hmm.
which was launched by really kind of the brainchild of Liddy, they claim. But
Mm-hmm.
John Mitchell, all these guys, they were a part of it, right? They were clearly a part of it, and it's a huge reason as to how there was so much. I mean, it was basically millions of dollars that they were suggesting should be, siphoned into this operation. I mean, it's absolutely crazy the kind of the depth and breadth of what they were attempting to accomplish with this, and Gemstone outlines what happened at Watergate because it's literally a part of the operation was burglaries was one of the big aspects, and burglaries at like diplomatic right, like facilities like the Watergate, right, which makes sense. But so um quickly, just to finish this out,
Mm-hmm.
is that basically it was, like I said, members of the White House plumbers were Frank Sturgis, Gordon Liddy, um, and then Nixon administration official Eagle Crow, who allegedly recommended Liddy, and Nixon's hatchet man Charles Colson, who was the one who apparently recommended Howard Hunt and was um, also was a classmate of his at Brown University, like I said, and so Hunt was now posing as the retired CIA, working for the Mullen and Company, which was like a PRA or a PR agency, and and it's since been outed as a CIA front operation, And yes, it's just, man, there's no coincidence. And James McCord, also a CIA officer who is part of the OS, and he is now appointed as head of security for CREEP, Committee to Reelect the President. And this is when the Moore Radford affair really becomes crucial to understand, because basically the Joint Chiefs of Staff had launched a spying a scandal, a spying operation against Nixon, right? It's like, it's really crazy, but it's what I think kind of brings us to the reason why Nixon was launching this private intelligence operation in the first place, was because he had exposed a spy ring that
Mhm.
was being wielded against him, which
Yeah.
is
This is where
what?
the component of what I was getting at with these splinters, like this almost like other CIA existing. There, this war of the CIAs that were kind of happening at this point in time. Although
It's
that's not the,
ridiculous.
I guess the best way to put it, but it's
Right.
like you had the rogue CIA kind of doing whatever the fuck it wanted, and you
Hmm.
had other entities trying to kind of clash. And I do think there
Oh
probably
yeah.
were, in some of these things going on at the time, there were legit actual intel agent wars within the own intel
Oh yeah.
agency. So I think that
Definitely.
was what part of what a component of this breakup that I think, and I think understanding that this, like, the infrastructure of this really does inform things later. So you just kind of
Yeah.
realize how they operate, how they touch things. You can kind of wave away the illusion of having being in any way reined in by the state.
Right.
So yeah, and it makes you sound a lot less crazy when you start thinking about how they go about doing things, and you can start plugging and playing their methodology and be like, oh, well, that makes sense now. Whereas when you don't have this sort of understanding, you sound like schizophrenic.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, when there's such excruciating details that we can point to, where it's like, you can lay out the foundation of this theory, and it seems so much more plausible than the official narrative. It's just, to me, it's like, I think the only thing that we can debate is is like the claims later on in this, which go as deep as potential pedophilia and things of that nature. Which, I know the call girl operation is legitimate, and so it's just like, it, it feels like one of the most complex scandals in American history, in a way, because of how much, like you were saying earlier, the layers that you can continue to pry and pull. It's just, you realize that it's the perfect example, right? As far as our common enemy is concerned, and clearly there's no hero in this, in my opinion, right?
Yep.
Other
Which
than
is kind of what I was
some,
driving at with the Nixon
yeah,
point earlier, because I feel like
yeah,
when I lay out why the intelligence agency might want him gone,
right,
it makes some people, like especially in our spheres, go, oh, well, does that mean you're saying you like him because he's no? I'm not,
right,
just because he's an enemy of my enemy, it doesn't necessarily mean he's my friend. Like,
exactly.
they can just be two enemies that are fighting each other,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
I mean, I might have an opinion on who should win, but I don't know. I'm not really having
right.
any part in this game.
Yep.
So,
I know,
but
man.
yeah, I don't know. Any last thoughts? I guess you kind of wrapping up,
I
or
mean,
what's up?
honestly, I think we have so much left that it's
Hmm.
it's just probably the best place we could stop, because it really,
Yeah.
I think that we can start out, at least in part two. We can kind of tie this off, and then get into the real details of the burglaries, because I think that once you realize, exactly the course of the operational procedure took, it's just, it starts to become very clear and obvious, like, what was the potential goal here, and so, anyway, yeah, it's one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever come across, honestly, man. And I'm
so in your
excited to get to the
face,
bottom
and
of
you're
it.
like, it's nuts when you start seeing like the real story, and you're like, this was really like the wool was pulled over all our eyes like this. It's nuts. But anyways,
There,
Austin, sorry, if you have any final thoughts, feel free, but just let people know where they can find you at. Whether any upcoming things you got, things like
cool.
that. Maybe your social media if you ever start wanting to use that,
How dare you? My God.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
bad. It's funny. I get shit from like all my other buddies, like tagging buddies, have like bigger accounts. But like I just go through periods of time where I'm just not that inspired. Every now and then I'll have like a funny joke in my head or
yeah.
a deep thought, and I'll share it. But for the most part, I just like maybe once a week pop in and be like, check out this week's No Way Jose. And that's about all I really do on there.
I honestly think what it is that I'm so freaking tired by
Yeah,
the time I'm done. Like, just I have to read so much to kind of put a lot of this together that it's like I just have so much of my time is consumed with either isolating clips but I need to find a way to post more often with it because I mean
yeah.
clearly it's all very
If
interesting and
you're
so
if you're posting if you're pulling clips for your show, you should
yeah,
start using a lot of those for tweets
I
because
really should,
those are the
man.
kind of things that fucking go on, and then you can put like a little reply and put your
You're
thing. But
right.
anyways, social media tips for another time.
Right, right. But what I was gonna say is just one final thought is just how often throughout researching and studying this scandal, Watergate, like I was just like slapped in the face with other glaring examples that we've pointed to over time with all the content that we've covered. Like I mean, when we get into the arrest of the burglars in the Watergate, and you find out Carl Schaffler's role, one of the arresting officers, you're just gonna feel like, oh yeah, the guy that was waiting to arrest Tim McVeigh. Like that's what it feels like, and yeah, there's so much of that, right? So anyway, it's good. It's kind of if it wasn't, if aspects of it weren't so dark, then it's kind of an exciting story. But
Yeah.
anyway, other than that, yeah, support me on Buzzsprout and Patreon. Like I said, I'm gonna really try and attempt to set up my Patreon by next week. Have that done and finally be like posting to it a little bit. But
Yeah.
beyond that, you can follow me on Twitter at underclasspod, on Instagram at the underclass podcast, and find my podcast on basically all audio streaming platforms, the underclass podcast.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right, guys, I do want to let you know that today's episode was brought to you by Nadeau Shave Co. Big Shave has been psyoping the American people for decades with their multi-blade razor scam. Don't fall for that bullshit. Get rid of that razor burn, the irritation, those ingrown hairs that are caused by that multi-blade nonsense. Return to traditional shave. Do it just like your grandpa used to do. It's cheaper. It's better for your skin. It's just altogether just better. Look at the picture. The thing is pretty slick. I mean, you go, what is it? It's $75 allows you to shave for the entire year, and that's just a ballpark. You get one traditional safety razor there, and you get a box of 100 stainless steel razor blades as well. Those will last you as long as you can make them last. But obviously, he's saying a year, so that's the ballpark. But I'm telling you, you can go longer. But keep an eye out. There's going to be some new shave, body, and hair soaps available soon. NadeauShaveCo.com. Use Jose for 10% off your entire order. All right, guys, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Share around this show. That's how it gets around. We always say the words that de-boost us on YouTube. We say the no words. So help us out with that. Follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose. And with that, we are out.